Good to see you all. We're going to get started and then kind of cover lots of things today, especially out of the chapter 14 on stress and emotions and stress and health. And as I do, there might be some questions that you have. So let me pray for us. And I'll pray for y'all as finals week comes up, papers I know, and exams, travel, and some other things. Anything else besides that we could that we can remember to pray for?
My parents are now in Ethiopia.
Oh,
They're adopting a little girl.
Her parents are in Ethiopia adopting a little girl. So just pray for the what family should we say? The Bennett family as they adopt a little girl and travel. Wait, one more time. I lost half of that.
My high school teacher's grandson was born and died this weekend.
Okay.
So it was really fun.
High school teacher's grandson, if you heard, died, and so the baby didn't live very long. And so pray for the family. Family name we can? Pickering family. Just pray for them.
One of the professors that my best friend has, his son just went back into leukemia and he's going
He just went back into where?
leukemia.
Leukemia. Do you remember who it was, or?
I have no clue.
Okay, we'll just pray for that family and professor's family. Okay, let me pray first, and then we'll get going today. Father, we stop to acknowledge that all life comes from you, and all ways in which we even know and live are dependent upon fully your breath and your goodness to us. Your patience with us, therefore, forbearance is remarkable. For that, we just thank you. We come to you now with busy lives, busy couple of weeks with finals coming up. I pray for students as they're preparing for finals and papers and projects that you would go before them and give them the time they need and the energy to continue to do well. We just pray for the Bennett family and the joy that is of going for an adoption. Pray for safety as they travel to faraway places, and the baby they bring home, may it be a joy and a blessing, and we just thank you for them and just pray for that family. And we think about the Pickering family who are dealing with the grief of a baby that they lost, and just the difficulty and the grief that they will be going through. We just lift them up in this difficult time and just pray for that family. And then we also just think about the other family that's dealing with recurrence of leukemia, and as they struggle with that you will give the doctors wisdom and insight to help them in this process and in this journey that sounds like they've been on before. But we just lift them up to you. And I just pray for this presence, your presence in this classroom today. And we know you are here. We give this to you as we have all semester. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this is it. We have like this week, and then we're done in here. There's 2 lectures left. And so today, I'm going to talk a little bit about health psychology out of chapter 14. And then on Wednesday, I'll talk about social psychology. And then the final is on Wednesday at 1 o'clock in here, a week from Wednesday. So here's one more quick announcement. There's still the survey online that many of you all can take that's worth up to 2 experimental credits. And how many have already taken that? Wow, cool. How many are still planning on taking it? Do it soon. And how many need one more even besides that? All right, today, right after this class, in about an hour, there'll be a quick survey in here. It will only take about 10 to 15 minutes. So anybody can stay and take the survey. If, in fact, we'd like as many to stay. I'll let class out a few minutes early. If you just have to leave and you don't want to do any more surveys, you're free to leave. But for those that want at least one more experiment and want to stick around and or just take this for the person that's working on it, it's actually a national study that's being published, and it'll be cool to see our results in this. But it's, again, completely up to you. And so that'll be at the end of today, and that'll be worth one experiment for those that need it. So for anybody that still needs an experiment, you just stay here. It'll take about 10 minutes after class, so you should only be about 5 minutes late to wherever you normally go. Does that make sense? Question?
Yeah, if we took the 2 experiment thing, when will that be posted?
Yeah, if you just took the 2, it'll take us about a week before we get it up there. A lot of experiments are still coming in.
That one experiment that is $5, did you guys figure out that one?
Yeah, the one with the $5, we are not going to be able to make it work for any units, unfortunately. We tried, but we just can't figure out how to do it. All right. You can't, all right, here we go. Yes.
So if you want the last test to be dropped, you don't have to take it.
And that's right. If you want the last test to be dropped, you just don't even need to take it. I'll just give you a 0. It'll look bad, but it won't count against you for any way, shape, or form negatively. Health psychology. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at this today. Health psychology is a field within the discipline of psychology that primarily deals with the connection between the medical field and the psychological field because of the topic. There are some key questions. You don't have to write these down, but there are some things we're going to look at today, and I'm going to ask your opinion about some of these as well as we go on, because it's about stress and about where we're at and some other things. But some key questions that health psychologists ask are, why do people get sick? And what causes illness? And so I'm going to ask you this question to be thinking about. If any of you know how a great-great-grandparent died and or from what, if you traced back your history, if they were living in the early part of the last century, if any of you all are traced that back, think through and see if you happen to know, and I'll ask you who knows how they died, and we'll try and predict what the most likely event that caused deaths 100 years ago or 120 years ago, and how different that is today. And health psychology is finding in some research that we are dying, and we are of different things than we were dying of things 120 years ago. That is, your life expectancy is greater, but the things that are killing people today are different. And the question is, why? What's happened? So all we'll do, we'll talk about what health is, we'll talk about what role do our thoughts have, and what role does spiritual beliefs have related to health. If you have a walk with God, if you have spiritual beliefs, if you attend events that are religious in nature, does that help protect you from illness? And it would sound like the quick answer is no, but in reality, the quick answer is, it's yes. And the question that we have is, why would people that attend religious events have a lower mortality rate at any given year? Why would they be less likely to die than non-attenders in that year? What's happening with religious beliefs? And so we'll answer this question. Then we'll talk a little bit about stress, how bad is it, and then what happens to some things, especially the emotions like anxiety, and the impact that it has on the body. So questions? Okay. What do emotions like anxiety, or how do emotions like anxiety impact the body? Well, ultimately, by the way, the answer to this one is going to be simple. What happens in the mind of a man is always reflected in the disease of his body. Do you believe that? Do you believe that what happens in your mind and the emotions that you have an influence on your body? How many believe that your thinking, your emotions influence? How many give an example of how anxiety or a certain emotion that you've had has impacted your body? Anybody have one? How many people feel stressed right now? Let me see your hand. All right, you feel stressed. How many are also experiencing certain physical symptoms that tell you why you're stressed? How do you know you're stressed? Let me hear. So let me see your hand. How do you know?
I have adrenal fatigue.
Oh, okay. So just energy, lack of, or feeling.
Yeah, but it's from like years.
Okay, so yours is, you have a longer history of this. Good. Others?
I actually have a cold right now because I'm so stressed.
Are some people, how many, are your immune systems influenced or impacted by being stressed? Can you have greater colds or more exposure to cold viruses that result in getting the cold if you're stressed than if you're not? Guess what? The answer is yes. But what role then? How many have certain kinds of ways in which you can tell that your body is stressed and it lets you know? Other ways?
I didn't really know.
How many get nauseous or you have stomach issues? How many have like maybe muscle issues like back or neck aches or jaw aches or, okay. There is no question in the field of psychology or in the field of medicine, there's no question that emotions, your thoughts about them, and your experience with them influences our body. That is without and beyond question. The only thing is, how does it come about, and what role can we play in fixing it? And health psychology is concerned with just this interaction. Health psychology begins to explore the question, how do psychological and even social factors, things that we do and think, how do they promote and maintain health? And how can we prevent, therefore, and treat illnesses? That is health psychology. You'll find health psychologists in medical fields, at hospitals. It's a subdiscipline of psychology in which you can get a PhD and go out and work and primarily ask questions like these and then go explore them. It's a fun area. How many are interested in medicine in general? Maybe nursing or other areas? This is the connection, if you like, psychology and medicine, where they come together. We'll talk about some surprising findings. For example, we'll look at why and what role certain beliefs or appraisals have when it comes to things like emotions, anxiety, and then impacts on the body. Why, for example, are we able to find a relationship between people that have spiritual practices and greater health? We'll talk a little bit about it. So, that's what we're going to do today. Questions? No? All right. Yeah.
Is spiritual practices more of a causation or a correlation?
Ooh, that's a good question. She said, the spiritual practices that we're talking about, is it more of a correlational finding or a causative finding? The answer is it's a correlational finding. Yep, we find increased correlations between health rates, longevity, death rates in any given year, and a correlation between that and your spiritual walk. Doesn't mean it's, and there's lots of, trying to explain it, we'll talk about all the variables that come into play. Yeah?
When you say spiritual walk, do you talk about Christianity?
Yeah, and we'll talk about a spiritual walk, we'll talk about religious attendance, and it's not limited to just Christianity. Yep. But we'll talk about it. So, anybody know what their great-grandparents died of? Anybody traced it back and know, for example, what they died of? Yeah. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis. Do you remember how long ago about, or what year? It was way back, maybe? Way back, all right, tuberculosis. Ooh, an accident, just some kind of farming accident.
She had cancer in her ovaries?
Cancer.
My grandpa's dad got struck by lightning.
Struck by lightning, okay. Wow. That's not common. What's yours?
Stroke.
A stroke? All right. Traditional views of illness, and what I'm going to call just the traditional view, always looked at and explained that most of our health and death ultimately was because of biological phenomenon. What this means is that it was contagious diseases that were the biggest killers. Gross, huh? That's pretty cool. It was contagious diseases that were the most likely cause of our great-great-great-grandparents' deaths. In fact, when we look at the past and not that far off, it was simply because people tended to die from things that they caught, but of course there could have been other things, lightning, not fairly common, but accidents and other things. In 1908, when Biola University was founded, what were the 5 leading causes of death? If you were going to die then, what were you going to die from? Number 1 would have been what? 1908. By the way, this is in your book, so if you don't write it down, that's fine. It's a list. But what were you likely to die from? Number 1 cause of death for your great-grandparents in 1908. Anybody? Pneumonia and influenza. If you look back at your records, many of you will find I had a great-grandfather died in the influenza that was worldwide in the early 1900s in this country. It killed many people. By the way, you can still die of these things today, and in other countries, this rate is pretty high. But this was the number 1 killer. And again, this is in your book, so if you don't want to write about it, but TB, we have someone here who had a grandparent then, died of tuberculosis, which is not uncommon back then. Number 3 would have been diarrhea, 4 heart disease, and 5 stroke. And the reason, for example, diarrhea would be on there would because many diseases like cholera that they're facing in a country like Haiti today, that's how you're going to die. When cholera strikes, this is what happens, okay? So, 5 leading causes. By the way, today, ready? If we were trying to predict somebody who is 20 years old today, what they will die from in the future, what are we finding is the number 1 cause of death today? Anybody? Number 1 cause of death. Is it pneumonia? Is it influenza? Is it anything on this list? Yes. Your number 1 cause likely is called a chronic disease, not a contagious, and the likelihood of you dying from a particular disease is going to be what's called a chronic, and it's going to be heart disease. Number 1 killer today. Second, anybody want to guess? Second leading cause of death today is cancer. Now, why does this list begin to start looking differently? It's because we're starting in most places in this world, though these are still high in some countries, especially in some of your European and countries that have higher rates or fewer rates of the contagious diseases, people are beginning to die from things like heart disease and cancer and stroke, lung disease, and of course accidents continue to be on the list as a pretty big killer, but those are the leading causes. Now, what makes this rather interesting is, again, this is in your book, and so whether you get it or not is you can go back and look at it. What makes this interesting is that people's behavior influences these chronic types of diseases. If you choose to smoke, or if you choose to drink, or if you choose to overeat or not exercise, it has an influence on these. That is not the same as if you choose to do those things with pneumonia and influenza. They might have a small impact, but not as great as it is here. By the way, what is the leading cause of death for somebody your age? Leading cause of death. By the way, this goes all the way down to even young children. The number 1 leading cause of death for somebody your age is? It's a car accident. Unintentional injuries, primarily the automobile. That is most likely the result when somebody dies under the age of 25. It's some sort of accidental injury. And the number 1 type of accidental injury, unintentional, is through an automobile accident. Even our behaviors, however, influence rates of death while we drive a car. You're 400% or 4 times more likely to have an accident if you're on a cell phone. We talked about the focus of attention and how inattention blindness influences these kinds of things. So health psychology begins to say, how does your behavior influence these kinds of things? All right, questions? What this means is today we're starting to look at those things like chronic diseases, which give you a very interesting way. Instead of looking at this as a biological phenomenon, you can actually influence. You can actually influence mortality rates by having people pay attention to how they think, how they deal with their emotions, and their behaviors, which is called a biopsychosocial view of illness. There's social-cultural, psychological, and biological all together, okay? And these play a role. And so health psychologists begin to explore the interaction between these things, like biological phenomenon and ways we catch disease, but when we do, how much we follow our doctor's prescriptions or orders. Behaviors that would lead us to be more likely to have things like heart disease or contribute to it. And then, of course, the sociocultural. How does a society and the various factors related to society or cultural variables influence? And this is what health psychologists study. All right. To talk real quickly, the role of spirituality and faith, you're more likely, as I said, we'll answer this question in the positive. Does being religious have any physical benefits? The answer to this is it does. It seems that, quote, being religious does have an impact on our health. There is a strong correlation between faith and health and healing. Anybody want to try and explain why would there be a correlation that's positive between faith and health and healing? Yeah, go ahead.
Because no suicide, no drugs, no alcohol, no tobacco, and
No, it's good. He's saying there probably are things that people of faith do less of, right? That can contribute. Anybody else? Why would there be a relationship between your faith and maybe health?
The fact that the person may be under less stress.
Maybe they're under less stress because of why? What might come about?
They have a sense of hope, maybe.
Ooh, how about a sense of hope? So one, we have fewer kind of negative behaviors. Maybe they have an increase in a sense of things like hope. That's good. Anybody else? Yeah. And maybe more social interaction. Where at? Like in places in communities, right? Like at church. By the way, those are the answers. That's it. Religious attendance predicts better health and a lower risk of death in any given year. And the answer to why would religious attendance predict better health and a lower risk of death in any year is because of what was just listed. More healthy behaviors. That is, there tends to be less smoking or drinking or things that cause or lead to things like accidents or greater risk for heart disease. There's greater social support like churches, even marital rates are higher, and positive emotions. There's a more coherent worldview, for example, that sticks together, that explains things, that provides hope or optimism.
What is the criticism of that? Because I know that, like, if we're maybe we can affect your health, like, what is there any like criticism that you know of?
Of this particular view? Well, this view isn't really. The question is this view critical? That is, are there people that doubt the relationship between spirituality and faith? Is that what you mean? Well, there's not a lot of people, even in the field, that doubt this. What I think they do question is, why do they find this? What's the key variables that influence this? And this gets back to the question earlier, is this correlational? And the answer is, yeah, there could be lots of things that explain this, and people are continuing to look at why people that have certain beliefs or faiths, but the idea is there probably is something that's getting mediated. And then the idea of social support would be an example. It helps people when they're struggling to have people to fall back on. And so the only criticism that comes in is not necessarily a criticism, it's simply trying to explain why this exists. And there's pretty good evidence that in all cases when they follow these things, these do explain the relationship that exists.
Is there any studies that show different benefits between, say, Christianity or Islam or cult?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. In a lot of these cases, the reason there's, it's religious attendance is they're not. I imagine people have looked at differences between, let's say, types of religious attendances, let's say Islamic or Jewish or Christian, but I'm not sure if they've found any real good studies that distinguish or differentiate at this point, but I'm just not aware of many that have tried to look at differences. I'm sure they have.
Are there studies that talk about the effects of prayer?
Yes. There are studies that have looked at prayer, and the results are also very strong, moderate to strong, in that prayer seems to have an influence. It may be because of these kinds of things here. And in fact, your book briefly talks a little bit about it, but there are studies out there trying to find what role does prayer play in our health. And it's still an open question. This is a cool area. By the way, your book does mention it and brings it up. And it has a lot there. Now, you don't have to write these verses down, but I think it's very powerful. By the way, of all these verses in the Psalms, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. I love Psalm 56:8. You number my wanderings and put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? I think that's a cool verse. That God takes our tears and cares enough for them that He records them. It's a cool way of thinking about this. What role then, ultimately, do we have when we have this sense of hope or optimism, and that's probably what's mediating some of these effects? A worldview that's a little bit more coherent, a sense of optimism and hope, and then the opposite of things like stress. The idea of contentment can be very powerful. And so look at it and see. Your book talks some about it, but it's a wonderful studies that have been done showing some of these things. What I'd like to do is then talk some a little about stress, because stress is one of the big topics within health psych. Any other questions real quick? Stress comes up in many different languages simply because of why. When you see a word, you don't have to write all these because they're all the same, but in all of these languages, why do we use the same word for stress? What's the explanation as to, in Spanish and Italian and German and almost every language, we use the same word? It either tells you it's a very, very old word or it's a not so old of a word. In this case, it's an old word that got new meaning in a sense because in 1936, this guy right here, Hans Selye, used it in a certain way, and I'll let you read his story. It's a great story of how he came up with the topic of stress. He injected mice, for example, with a substance, and he found something strange. They didn't like it. So he took a mouse and he injected it with this kind of substance, and the mice, their heart rates went up and their respirations went up and all these things. And he, at 28 years of age, thought, I have found a hormone, because hormones have that effect. If you inject animals with a particular hormone, that would be the result. And so he found that result. And that was the great news, and he was so elated until they had what in psychology is a very important kind of thing that we do when we run experiments. What kind of groups must we also run besides an experimental group? A control group. And so guess what he did with the control group? He took rats, mice, he injected them with salt or saline solution, and guess what happened? They did the exact same thing. Their heart rates went up, their respirations went up to the exact same thing that this one did. And so he realized, I haven't discovered a new hormone. I just discovered that rats don't like to be injected. And they respond this way. And he was devastated until he realized what? He went, wait a minute. You inject people, rats, this way. They always respond that way. And he went, that's stress. He didn't take him that quickly to say. He said, basically, that's what happens when people get sick or ill. This is what happens. And then he realized, this happens to everybody all of the time. Forget the hormone. I'm going to study that response. That's Hans Selye. Came up with the word stress eventually. It's in all these different languages. Even animals experience stress. So for example, animals like dogs get stressed. Here's a dog that's stressed out right there. You can just see it on the poor dog's face. Maybe that's not funny for some of you. I thought it was funny. Stress is the whole process by which environmental events threaten or challenge us. Environmental events called stressors that we appraise as threatening or challenging is the definition of stress. It's this process then and these events and our appraisals about them. If we appraise something that's just occurred, how many would say that if I gave the final today as a pop quiz, how many would say, oh gosh, that would stress me out right now? Some of you would say, yeah. How many have read this chapter, by the way, beforehand? So, okay. Okay, for the 4 of you that read this, you may not be as stressed as the 504 that have not. It now is stressing me out thinking about these implications. But you see, some of you would say, oh, that doesn't stress me out. I'll just take the final because I'm going to drop it anyway. And you'd be like, whatever. Or, oh, no, I'm fine. I guess anyway. Or maybe some of you would say, man, this is a drag because I have to do really well. And if you did that, I would not hate you. I would not only hate you, but I wouldn't do very well, and I would be stressed. Or if I said, come on up here and finish my lecture for me on this because you seem stressed out. Just tell people what you're feeling. Might cause stress. Ultimately, this process then becomes one, oh yeah, I forgot. How many saw this one? I don't know if it'll play or not, but it's funny. Can you guys hear that? You can hear that? I don't think you can.
Hello, I'm American IPC. Microsoft Office 2008 just came out. Need one of those babies.
Can you guys hear that? Too bad. It's not that funny anyway. Maybe it is. Here we go. Oh, I know. Oh, it had to be plugged in. That would help. No? Painful. All right, here we go. Maybe. Come on, you could do it. All right.
PC. Thanks, PC. Microsoft Office 2008 just came out for Mac, so you're going to be doing a lot more work. I figured you'd need one of those babies.
Great. What is it exactly?
It's a stress toy. Ever seen a stress toy? Just give it a squeeze and some stresses you have. Like, right. Oh, Mac just got the latest version of Microsoft Office. Mac can do all the Office stuff you can do.
This is a good thing you share those.
You and Mac are so compatible. I want to transfer all my files over to Mac. Give it a squeeze.
Okay. It really wasn't even worth it, was it?
Today we know
Oh, but this one is.
complex interactions within the brain can be upset by the tiniest chemical changes. Changes caused by emotions, environmental pressures, and stress. These minuscule changes can lead to significant shifts of behavior. But how feelings and emotions work and how exactly behavior is affected by chemical changes is still largely unknown.
Anxiety and stress are the buffer between an event in the world I must interpret and the way I'm going to respond to it.
In all probability, what stressful stimuli do is they don't produce any qualitatively different responses in the brain. What they do is they change the quantity and balance of the ongoing responses that are occurring. Stress is not some physical event which occurs to the animal or to the human. It is, in fact, that is a relatively minor part of the stress event. It sets the stage for the stress response. But the stress response is going to be critically determined by the nature of the environment in which that physical stressful stimulus is engaged. embedded, and what the organism can or cannot do in response to that stressful stimulus.
In the animal kingdom, stress reactions are essential for survival. Approaching danger triggers the so-called fight-or-flight reaction, making new energies available for the big getaway. Under stress, a neurotransmitter is released by the hypothalamus, which causes the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, and the locus coeruleus to release chemicals which keep the organism in a constant state of excitation. An air traffic controller comes to work at the Montreal Air Traffic Control Center. His name is Claude Bizarro. Airports depend on controllers like Bizarro. Air traffic controllers are subjected to high levels of stress on the job. At the start of every shift, Claude Bizarro has to read and acknowledge the day's memos. Bizarro for married man.
Ultimately, what's important is the fact that our emotional responses to events that happen to us, these stressors, are highly impactful on our physical well-being. What this means is that the way in which you deal with things like anxiety and the way in which you deal with emotions, especially the negative ones, things, for example, that are like anger, have a big influence and they begin to add up. So we'll start with this. What are some common stressors in general that you feel or that people in general feel, let's say, at your age? What are some of the most common stressors of college students? Yeah?
Life.
Grades. Homework. Life. Homework. Money. Any others? Relationships. Let's start with the most common. And by the way, if you write these down, it's not that big of a deal, the list. I think you'll all understand them. Some of the most common stressors are economic stressors. Things like lack of money, maybe unpaid bills. How many say that's a stressor right now in your lives or in people's lives you know? All right? How about work, school, exams, project deadlines, even traffic getting here? How many feel like traffic is a stressor? Okay? Work or study. Other common stressors besides economic and work and school could be things like physiological, that is, things that are going on. Primarily in this case, it would be like lack of sleep, for example. How many are probably dealing with lack of sleep even now? Yeah. Can be very stressful. So can unhealthy eating, smoking, and drinking patterns and habits. Others that are found out there include psychological, with personal relationships, things like conflict. For younger kids, oftentimes bullying. We're finding huge increases in cyber or internet types of bullying that's gone on, and you've heard about some of these things. And then social stressors, things like family conflicts. All of these come into play when we start to look at what are the most common stressors that are out there. Now, I'm going to group these all into kind of some different categories in just a minute. But are there any that you would add to this? They seem to be different ways and different things that come up. Ultimately, there are ways that we're going to talk some about controlling these and the influence that we have over some of these. But let me list these in a different way and list what I want to call 4 different kinds of categories of stress. The first major category would be things that are on this list, but they result for us in something like, oh, this is another funny one. How many know this one? I like this guy. Okay, here we go. We'll play him again.
In my younger days, I made lots of mistakes. I hung out with the wrong people. Learned some bad habits. Relationships. Drinking was the worst. Now, I take better care of myself.
Things are looking up. I love this one because he said, I neglected my relationships, and his dog is sitting there all sad. And the drinking was the worst, and he's drinking. I think that is like funny. Okay. Major types of stress. Things are looking up. Frustration. How many feel frustrated on a regular basis? What frustrates us? What are some things that are frustrating? Anybody? People? No, people are good.
People who are being hopeless.
Oh, people that are not being nice.
Being hopeless.
And hopeless. Other things that frustrate us? Ultimately, frustration is best thought of as some goal that's thwarted. Thwarted. Do you say thwarted or thwarted? Do you say the W? Thwarted. What a weird word. Thwarted. When some goal is blocked, we say you're dealing with frustration. Now, you don't have to write this down. How do you deal with the blocking of a goal? Anybody give me, like if all of a sudden you wanted something and you're unable to get it, what would be your natural tendencies? What would be people's tendencies? There's some different ways. You're facing a brick wall, you need to get something, and what would you do? Anybody? Real quick. What would be one way? Some ways could be this. You could go and say, well, I'll just keep with, and you don't have to write this down. With persistence and frustration and vigorous effort, you just keep going at the goal. Some say, well, I'll just try and figure out some other way to get what I want. Others will just directly aggress. Somebody else will go over here and kick something else, displaced. And then some will just withdraw and say, forget it. I don't have the energy or the ability. So frustration can be dealt with in many different ways. Aggressive, going around, withdrawing, circumventing. And it's one of these major categories that we all kind of differ in. Our personalities come into play and influence how we deal with this. Conflict is another big one. By the way, conflict can be interpersonal conflict. It can be in things that we want to do or not do. I'm going to give you 3 kinds that have been studied and looked at, kinds of conflict. One is approach conflict. You can think this sounds pretty positive, and it is. It's this idea. It's some kind of conflict that you have because you want to do 2 things that are in conflict. Anybody have 2 cool things that they want to do, but they're in conflict? Anybody have something? What would it be? Anybody have an example? You want to go to maybe, you have 2 classes at the same time next semester? Is that what you'd like to register? And to choose from. This one is good, that one's good. Speaking of, I shouldn't do this, but shamelessly, there's an interterm course, if anybody's interested, that I'm teaching along with Dr. Tanis and let's see who else, Dr. Klink, Dr. Muehlhoff, called IRIS, and it's for upper division or any kinds of psychology units. And so we'll be talking about films in there, like the film Inception, for example. You'll watch it, and then we'll discuss it from a psychological standpoint, as well as a communication and a theological standpoint. And it's over this interterm. It's called IRIS, and you could take upper division psych units if you wanted. That would count. So you can take that course or some other course, but this one's way better, so there's no conflict. Anybody else have an example of an approach? Yeah? Yeah, getting a job or going home for Christmas, because you can make money or go home and see family, and then right? Approach. You can imagine what avoidance would be. 2 things, right, that you don't want to do. Anybody have an example of an avoidance? You're between a rock and a hard place. I don't want this and I don't want that. Anybody? Somebody asks you on a date and you neither want to go nor say you don't. Do you have one? Cat food. The cat food. It could fall into either one of these, depending upon what you like or not like. And then lastly, ready? Another type of conflict is approach avoidance conflict. And this would be a decision that you have to make, has both pros and cons, right? You want to go do something, but it has some good things to it and some bad things to it. You want to go home for Christmas, but you know there's going to be some relationship difficulties, so it's not all that fun. All right, a third category of stress could be change. Change in life. By the way, there's a test for this. You want to take it? It's real fast. It's called personal life changes. If you don't have time, I'll just list this up here real quick. What you do is people that are experiencing lots of personal life changes are at greater risk for potential health issues than those that are not. The problem with this kind of test is everybody's on here. You can find yourself everywhere, usually not the first categories, hopefully, but you give yourself points if you've recently had the death of a spouse or been through a divorce or marital separation or jail term, etc. And you add up these points if you've had one of these. Okay? And then the list keeps going. And then the more points that you have, whether it's business readjustment or changes in whatever, or death of a friend, beginning or ending school, here's where you might have a whole bunch of points right here. And if so, you add these up. The higher your score, the more change or personal life scores that you have. There's a great measure of this. But here's the problem. Ready? High scores don't necessarily predict health problems. They're a great indicator of possible health issues or greater stress, but some people handle these things pretty well. And so some life change units you might score fairly high, but there's a lot of mediating variables. So we'll talk some about that, and your book mentions some of these things about daily hassles being even more important and more predictive. The last category, something called pressure. That is, pressure demands to behave or act in a certain way, for example. And so in this case, you have some expectations to behave in a certain way, and these things can cause stress. Okay? Of all these categories, there are other ways and other variables that mediate each of them. Your personality, how you deal with things like emotions, your social support networks, all come into play and change these. And so what I want to do is just shift real quickly to this very important notion of the influence then of ultimately stress on our health. And this starts with looking at our quick responses. Emotionally, you have this response. You've probably heard of the general adaptation syndrome. If not, write this down. The guy I mentioned, Hans Selye, came up with this. And what he looked at was that each individual deals with a stressful event in about the same way. When something happens to you that's stressful, your body responds with what they refer to as this general adaptation syndrome. I'll put it back up. But you go into this phase, this quick alarm reaction. And then you go into this period, stage 2 of resistance. And then ultimately stage 3, the stage of exhaustion. And the rats that were being injected with these chemicals, or even in the control group, were showing these exact same things, and they called it the general adaptation syndrome. It's our response to stressful things and the way our bodies end up trying to fight off these stressful events.
I kind of, like, after experiencing what this about therapy, I've actually had, like, in the middle of the exhaustion, like, almost, like, going back to complete normalness, living above normalness. Is that normal to be, like, to go above what you normally are? If, like you become very reactive, very, like, conscious of everything. Is that normal?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the question is this: what occurs here, like, for example, when you're exposed to this, like, are you talking about maybe here in the stage 2, the resistance stage, and then kind of feeling more frustrated at things, more quick to, is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Here's what happens. Physiologically, this can last for a little bit of time. By the way, if we looked at this by semesters, what we ultimately find for college students is the rate of even your healing from some things like, not a bad example, but one is like a puncture wound. They were students who were gone in, and they looked at from dental records those that had to get like somehow they had like their teeth worked on, and there was almost always quicker healing in the summer than there was in the middle of a busy semester. And the idea is that students were healing much faster when they were less stressed, and that stress was doing something, building up even a physiological change. And so there's no doubt psychological kind of things as well. People are more frustrated. Things bother them more, but it could be ultimately leading to this phase. And by the way, more prone to things like colds and viruses that could attack during this stage of exhaustion. The reason, by the way, one of the things I'll show you is a model of rats. And this has been a great field to explore animal models. Ultimately, what happens is there's this very quick appraisal when you get stressed to see how much control you have and how much resources you have to fight this. And so if there's an event that occurs, you have to appraise it. And this evaluation, this appraisal, is something that you quickly do and say, this event is either disturbing or not disturbing. If you appraise some event as disturbing, then you're going to activate the sympathetic nervous system. When this happens, this is what we begin to feel like stress. We begin to experience different levels and different physiological reactions. In appraisals like this, what's very important is how predictable was the event and how much in control do you have. Let me show you an amazing study related. This is in your textbook, by the way. You just simply look at and appraise whether or not the event is disturbing or not. And if it is, you start to think through your primary and secondary resources for dealing with it. They did a study with rats, and here's what he did. That was amazing related to appraisals. They took a rat and they hooked up its tail to a shock generator. And then they did this, ready? This tail sat there, this rat sat there with their tail hooked up, and they would randomly get shocked. Do you think the rat found that stressful? The rat didn't like it. They sat there and all of a sudden, they would just get shocked. How did they respond physiologically? Anybody read the study? What did the rat end up developing a lot of? They developed a lot of stomach ulcers. They didn't like just sitting there and randomly getting shocked. So they tried two different things. They put another rat right next to it, and they turned a light on. And so this rat was hooked up right next to that rat, right? But this rat, the light would turn on, and within 5 seconds, he would get shocked. Which rat do you think performed better? That is, they didn't get as sick. The rat that was randomly given the shock that didn't know it was coming, or the rat that was told, in 5 seconds, you're about to get shocked. Who had more stomach ulcers? Rat 1, who had no predictability, or rat 2, who saw the light turn on and knew it was coming? Who had greater number of stomach ulcers? How many think that the rat that could predict it, the light would turn on, he had more ulcers? How many believe that? By the way, it's probably a she. Most rats are these females. Why would the rat that saw the light turn on not experience as many ulcers? It's because they were able to predict, this is coming, and they would prepare themselves, and they didn't die. Now, there was a third rat, and this third rat was also hooked up, but they could control it. Ready? This rat, what's called the executive rat, the rat that not only could predict, but could also control it. This rat, the light would turn on, and you would put you'd put this rat in charge of all the other rats. So whatever happened to this rat would happen to all the other rats. He was the executive. The light turned on, but you gave him a little button, and within 5 seconds, if he would push the button, nobody would get shocked. Wouldn't that be cool? That is, you're sitting there, the guy right next to you, the rat next to you, is also hooked up to this same shock generator. The light turns on. You, however, as the executive, go over and push a button. Nobody gets shocked. They called him the executive rat. Do you think he had more or less stomach ulcers? Fewer or more? He's the executive rat. Fewer or more? He had more predictability and more control and fewer stomach ulcers. the model for humans is almost always the same. This study, done with rats, has been translated now with people that are in homes. For example, the elderly that are living in homes designed for them. Initially, they did this. They used to say, it's best for them not to have to make a lot of decisions. Let's just kind of, by the way, in these homes, one of the coolest things, a very positive, is having college students come and visit them. If there are people that live in these homes for the elderly, they love having college students come and visit. So they used to say this: why don't we just simply have college students come and visit, and that'll be a positive? And it was, and it always is. They come over, and the elderly people, they love it, and they say this is fun. It gives them kind of excitement when they're there. And then they decided to try this experiment on them, not with the shock, but with the predictability and the control. They would say, all right, a second group, everybody got visited. But of the three groups, those that just simply got visited on a random basis did great. But those that were able to predict when they were coming, that is, they were told, hey, college students are coming Friday at 2 o'clock. They, physiologically, and in measures of even things like mortality and death rates for that month, did better if they could predict that college students, and they knew when they were coming. Isn't that cool? But of all the groups, the third group did the best, and that is the people that were told, you get to pick the day and the time that you want college students to come and visit. And they realized, wow, that's an amazing way of taking an animal model, a study that is done here, and applying it to humans that has huge impact. That's a great study. By the way, the person who did this study, I'll show you what it looked like, just to give you a quick video. We won't do the whole thing. That's a little bit of stress right there, just to see how you respond.
Experiments have taught us that changing circumstances alter the impact of stress, and this knowledge has helped many human beings.
There's the rat with control.
It's an experiment illustrating the effects of control in the stressful situation. What you see here are two animals. One able to control the stress stimulus delivered to its tail, whereas the second animal receives exactly the same stress stimulus. This stimulus will occur every 60 seconds unless the animal, you see here in control, rotates the wheel on the front of its apparatus. If it rotates the wheel after the stimulus has occurred, it will terminate the stimulus. This animal therefore has control of the stimulus. The animal in the other cage next to it receives exactly the same stress stimulus, except that animal does not have control over it. That animal receives the stimulus at random, depending on the behavior of this animal. And what this experiment is designed to study are the physiological and neurochemical differences that occur in these animals because one has control as opposed to one having no control. And we now have pretty well established that the animal that does not have control over the stressful stimulus is by and large in much greater danger of developing stomach lesions or ulcers than does the animal that's in control.
It's a study that really does have some interesting implications. Think about when you drive with somebody, how many would rather be the driver than the passenger in a busy day of traffic? Ultimately, that person probably feels and experiences something very different than would, let's say, the person who doesn't have that kind of control. And so you can see how this applies and influences. Any questions on that video? It was very powerful, great demonstration of the role of predictability and control in stress.
Well, the controller or executive rat, like, does he have any comprehension that he's affecting these other rats?
Yeah, no. He asked the question, does the rat that's called the executive rat, does he know that would he be aware that whatever he does is influencing the other rat? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably not. The executive rat just simply is in, control of this and can predict it, and it probably doesn't have the ability or to recognize that this is going to influence the other rat. It's a good question. The other rat also doesn't know that.
Yeah, because the factor of like driving, just knowing that other people
Yeah, and then so it differs a little bit from the fact of driving when you might have the ability of knowing that this person is in my hands right now, so to speak. Yeah. It was always like this for us when we were driving a car. I don't know how many this happens to you. Whenever I would drive and we'd get into heavy traffic, and let's say we're trying to go away, it was a Friday, I would always do this. It'd be a Friday afternoon, we were trying to go away for the weekend, and it'd be bad traffic. And I remember one time we had this dog with us, and we had the dog in the back seat, and the dog would only bark when it saw the eyes or made eye contact with another human. So we were going so slow that the dog could look over at the car next to us, and it would bark. And so here I am all stressed out, and the dog barked when we were first married, and he went, woof, and I went, ah, like that. And I reached back to smack it. He was so fast, I missed him. But my wife went, oh, and I was so stressed, I couldn't believe that I reached back to smack this dog, but he barked right in my ear. And I tried to, and she kind of looked at me, you know, like, what if that was our child? And I thought, I hope they don't bark. So we had this discussion about me being a little bit stressed out in the car when I drive. It's like, yeah, because these idiots, look, how many when you drive, you're like, oh, bad drivers, and you honk. Okay, that's me. Like, oh, go faster, go slower, do something. And so I kind of stress out. And my wife would be like all calm. And I thought, it's just my personality and when we drive. But then, because I tended to do most of the driving, and then one time she was driving and I'm in the passenger seat and it's real busy and someone cuts her off and she gets real mad. Oh, stupid car! I'm like, oh, huh? And so I barked right in her ear to see, no, I didn't. But you see, then I went, oh, so wait a minute, there is something different. You do kind of, yeah, because he almost killed me. Yeah, that's what I've been saying. These people tried to kill me. And I tried to protect you. Personalities, emotions influence us. Which ones are the most damaging of the emotions? Well, for heart disease, it comes down to this. You can look at your emotional responses, your personality type, when it comes to stressful events. In fact, psychologists have referred to this as personality types A and B. How many know or have heard of type A or type B people? How many know if you're a type A? Well, I'll show you. Ready? A type A, you can real quickly take this evaluation. Type A's are those that are, if you can't read this, very competitive, always on the go, hard driving, demand perfection, ambitious, want quick promotion, and is a workaholic even at play. How many lean towards being type A? All right. Type B, ready? Non-competitive, relaxed in a control situation, easygoing, understanding and forgiving, confident and happy in the job, and enjoy leisure. How many are more type B? How many are kind of in between, you're not sure? All right. Real quickly. Who performs better in tasks that require a lot of work, and individual effort? A's or B's? How many say A's? How many who do better at performing work that requires a group setting in which you work together? B's. Ready? B's also do better in a couple of other ways, but let's ask this question. Which one gets promoted to the highest levels of executive offices? A's or B's? It's B's. B's because it requires a lot more social interaction, and the A's tend to die off before they make it that high. You see, being a type A is a risk factor for heart disease if... How many are the A's? Let me see. How many still want to admit it? A's, by the way, there's no problem being an A. In fact, A's are really good. You don't necessarily die earlier or have greater risk factor unless you have an A with what other addition? Being an A isn't a problem, but if you have A plus what? An A plus an emotion of hostility, cynicism, or anger, then you will have what's called a increased risk factor for heart disease an increased risk factor for heart disease, just like overeating, not exercising, and smoking. Being a type A with hostility is an increased risk factor for heart disease. The field of study that oftentimes looks at our immune system and our response, I just want to give you this because it's a cool word. Psychoneuroimmunology. Use it over Christmas break. Impress people. It just simply means that there's a field of study that examines our immune system's responses and its impact by the way we think. By the way, a great study has been done in psychoneuroimmunology, ready? Which finds that people who ruminate or constantly thinking about or dealing with something that they're trying to suppress and keep out and not deal with, a bad emotion from the past or a memory or something conflict that they're just not dealing with it, the field of psychoneuroimmunology has found that they suffer more than those who simply let it out and deal with it, even by writing in a journal, as simple as that, about the event, and actually writing it down has huge positive impacts, because holding back things, trying to keep them under awareness, takes a toll. Real quick study went like this. They told somebody, talk for 5 minutes. Ready? And they went like this. Share anything you want, 5 minutes. So they talked for 5 minutes. Everything was great. Then they said this. Now, we're going to have you do this again for 5 minutes, but we don't want you to think about a white bear. In fact, every time you're talking and you think about a white bear, we want you to ring this little bell right here. Ding, like that. Okay, ready? Go. So the people start talking and they say, okay, well, I've been thinking about going on vacation and I've been thinking about swimming in white bears. And then I was thinking about what I shouldn't be thinking about, white bears. Ding. Okay, now I'm thinking about, Thanksgiving break, how fun it was, and we ate, and bears eat a lot. Bing. And literally, the not thinking about something did what? It took over. It took over and infected them, and they couldn't stop thinking about it. And even though they were trying to suppress it, and so the answer is, when we try and suppress things, they start to show up in a weird, odd way. And forgiveness is a very powerful antidote. In most fields of study, forgiveness is a huge antidote. So, last thing you don't have to write these verses down, but I'm going to put up 6 ways that I want you to look at, not these verses, you don't have to write them down, just put down the word forgiveness. And here they are, ready? 6 ways of dealing with stress and coping that I want you to look at. As you write down these last things, here's where we're going to do a study, real fast, a survey for those that want to stay. It's only going to take 10 minutes. If you don't want to take the survey, you don't have to. You may get up and leave. If you still need an experiment, and or you just want to sit around for 5 or 10 minutes and fill out this survey, we'd love for you to take it. So, you may leave at any time.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.